Today I'm going to show you how to switch out the steering extension shaft with the universal joints on it on a Saab 9.3. I believe the same procedure also applies to Vectra C. First job is to get access to the screws that tighten both ends onto the steering column under the dash at one end and the steering rack at the other. Steering rack, of course, is down here. So the air pipe that leads from the airbox to the turbo needs to come off. Temporarily disconnects the control valve for the turbocharger actuator so that it can be moved to one side. Now you can see the top of the steering rack and the bottom end of the extension shaft with the lower universal joint. And just where I've got my finger there is where the bolt is that clamps it onto the top of the steering rack. The clamp bolt requires a 13mm socket. Here's a slide about the root cause of the problem and why you get corrosion in the universal joint. Pause the slide to read it. From inside the car, we now need to remove this kick panel above the pedals. There's a torque screw at this end. With this panel manipulated out of the way, you can now see the bottom of the steering column and the top end of the extension column where the clamp bolt is. You now need a 13mm socket or spanner to undo that clamp bolt. You will need to completely remove the bolt. The bottom end of the steering column shaft and the pinion shaft on the steering rack both have a notch in them. This notch is on one side only and the bolt has to pass through that notch. This provides a safety feature. If the bolt comes loose, then the joint won't come apart, but it also orientates the drive shaft and the steering rack together to make sure that they're lined up. Once both ends of the shaft are free from the rack and the column, get hold of this lip, pull the shroud out from the body panel, which sits in that groove there, and it comes away easily. Just manipulate it out past the pedals. I suggest putting the upper end of the intermediate shaft onto the steering column first. Just put a bolt through the clamp, just put it in a few turns by hand. That'll hold the intermediate shaft into place. Then push the shield down and push the little legs through the hole in the body. Then we need to go to the under bonnet. Now at the steering rack end, jiggle the joint onto the steering shaft at the top of the steering rack, and again put the bolt through a few turns by hand. Now that you've done that, we can get hold of the tags on the rubber shield, and then the idea is to pull those through. All that remains now is to tighten the bolt at each end. Now you must do that. If you can see there, the steering column shaft is moving inside the joint. It causes looseness at the steering wheel, loose feel. So you must tighten up the clamp at both ends. Once that's done, that's it, job complete, and you can put your trims back and happy motoring.